Alright everyone, so welcome to my Naughty Dog tier list video. So we just finished up talking about all these games, as most of you probably know, and I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let the series go. No, but for real, this will be the last thing involving Naughty Dog for now, at least, until they make a new game, of course. So if you don't know how tier lists work, I basically will just talk about each game briefly, and then I'll put it where I think it belongs, compared to the rest of the games in this list. And I'm not going to go over them in release order, I'm just going to go in the order that it gave me here. But coincidentally, we do start with Crash Bandicoot 1, which is the earliest game on this list. Obviously, because of that, it's one of the most dated on this list. I still really enjoy going back and playing this game, despite some of the flaws it has, with like the save system and everything. I rated this game less than its sequels on my review for it, but actually it's one of my favorite out of the trilogy. Because despite the fact that it's aged poorly in some aspects, it's just such an atmospheric game. It's much more atmospheric than the sequels. It has such a small amount of dialogue and cutscenes that it really just pulls you into the experience. Of course, the gameplay is what's really aged here. Your jumps are really heavy. The way you save is just not conventional. You have to type a really long password. There's no actual way of saving besides that. Most people find this game to be the hardest in the trilogy, and I think I agree just because of how challenging it is to 100% it because of the flawed save system. I think we'll start this one in the B tier. Well, it's either B or A. I'll go ahead and put it in the B tier for now. I might adjust it later, but I think B tier kind of just fits it because of like its flaws. Even though I love it, I love the atmosphere and everything, and I have a lot of nostalgia for it. I know it's pretty dated by today's standards, so I think it'll just be good in the B tier for now. Now, The Last of Us is next, and wow, it's a lot different of a game than Crash Bandicoot. It's not a platformer, it's more of a story-driven game. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. I might as well not even waste any time with this one. This one belongs in S tier. It's one of the best games I've ever played. The story is just fantastic, and the gameplay is not perfect by today's standards, but it was good for a game that was so story-driven. The characters are just unbelievably realistic. Like, the voice acting is so good, the writing is amazing. It feels like you're watching real people talking. It's also really good at making you feel sad. I mean, the opening of the game has like one of the saddest scenes I've ever seen just from the very start. It's only in the first like 20 minutes. And it only continues to get darker from there. And even with all of that, it has a really fun multiplayer mode. Like, I hope that The Last of Us Part 2 has a extension of that multiplayer. Like, I hope they put factions into The Last of Us Part 2 because it was a lot of fun. There's really not much else I can say that you haven't heard a million times about this game, so I'm just going to go ahead and move on, but just know that's an S tier game. Okay, so CTR is the final Crash game made by Naughty Dog. They only had a little bit of time left with the IP, and they decided to make a racing game, which seems really questionable, but it was a great choice because I think it's the best car racer I've ever played. You know, you have Mario Kart, which is a great game to play in parties, or if you have just a bunch of like friends over, because it's easy to get into. You pick it up and you can be pretty good at it. At least, I mean, everyone has a chance of winning. There's power-ups when you're in last place that'll shoot you up to first place. It's really accessible, like anybody can just pick it up and play it. Because of that though, I don't have very much fun playing Mario Kart on my own. Whenever I'm not in gatherings, I never could see myself really playing Mario Kart. It's just not that fun to me when you don't have a party. CTR, on the other hand, is completely the opposite of that. You have to learn how to play that game. The learning curve is really steep. Like, you'll start off and just winning regular races will be a struggle for you. I remember when I first started playing it, I was playing Nitro Fueled, the remake. I looked at the trophy list and some of them just looked impossible. But as you practice and stuff, those trophies become easier and easier. Like, if I were to go back and get the platinum trophy in that game again, it would be easy. Like, I wouldn't have any problem with any of those trophies. The mechanics are so fun to master in that game. The tracks are so memorable. They're perfectly designed with shortcuts to learn. Now, some people will find a harder time getting into it because it's not, like I said, it's not as easy to pick up as Mario Kart. But if you really put your time into it, it's so satisfying to get good at. Probably has similar appeal to like why people play the Dark Souls games, because it's extremely challenging, which puts a barrier up for some people, scares them off of playing it. But once you learn how to play that type of game and you get through it, it's so rewarding. It's really satisfying to get good at. CTR for me, I think, is the best kart racer. Of course, I haven't played every kart racer, but for me, it's the best kart racer I've ever played. I think that's an easy S tier. Gave it a 10 out of 10 in my review, so you probably could have guessed that. So Uncharted 4 was the last mainline Uncharted game. I think it was a great send-off to Nathan Drake's story. I mean, it was really long. It was the longest Uncharted game. Some people complain about that, the pacing, which I do agree that the pacing's not perfect. The beginning is really slow, the first few hours. But I'm kind of glad with how long it ended up being, because I enjoyed all of it, really. Even the slow parts at the beginning I really enjoyed, because I liked that game. I like the series. And there was you got to play Crash Bandicoot in the beginning, so that made it all worth it. This game just feels a lot more grounded than the other 3 Uncharted games. There's no real supernatural elements like there were in the other ones. And the characters are a lot better written. They feel more like real people. As opposed to the last game, they were still pretty good characters in the other games, but they just really, they use what they learned in The Last of Us, basically, to make these characters even better than they were before. And the gameplay feels better than ever. The gameplay, I think, is the biggest improvement. It doesn't feel a lot different, but they added little things that just make it feel better, like they added the rope swing, which I feel like makes the combat encounters a lot more fun and diverse. And the action set pieces are awesome. I mean, they're a little more, for the most part, they're a little smaller scale than something like Uncharted 2 and 3, but like I said, it feels more grounded in reality because of that. This is a great game, though. I mean, I said in my review it was my favorite Uncharted game, but I'm always going back between the 4th and the 2nd one. It's a real close one for me. The 4th one for now, I'm going to go in A tier. I don't like it as much as The Last of Us, so I don't think it belongs up there. I just think The Last of Us is a better series all around, or at least the first game. I've come over the years to realize that the Uncharted series is actually pretty simple, the gameplay, mainly because I've played it so many times that now coming back to play it for the reviews, it wasn't very fun to play them again. Once I've been through the story and stuff, I kind of realized that the gameplay is really repetitive. You kind of are just climbing and shooting, and the climbing's not all that engaging. I mean, you kind of just point the analog stick in a certain direction and you spam X and you'll climb. There's not much to it really, so it makes it to where it makes it not very replayable. Okay, so next we have Jak X Combat Racing. This was originally the game that I said I probably wasn't going to review for the Naughty Dog reviews, because I usually don't like racing games, with CTR as an exception. I like car racers usually. But Jak X Combat Racing is what people call an arcade racer, which I had never heard of before. And I actually really was surprised by that game. I really enjoyed Jak X. It had an actual decent story, which I wasn't expecting at all. I wasn't expecting to get any story from a racing game. But I think the story was better than Jak 3, really. The racing felt fantastic. It was really fun. I remember I beat this game in like 2 days because I was so into it. I 100% completed it in like 2 days. There's all kinds of mini games to mix it up so you don't get tired of just racing. The only thing that really stood out to me, like I said in the review, was some of the power-ups were a little unbalanced. One of the power-ups specifically, I can't remember the name of it, but it would basically ensure that you would never be in first place for very long because it would seek out first place and destroy them. So no matter how far ahead you were, it would seek you out and it would just blow you up, and it just felt really unfair. It felt like I could never be in first place for very long, even though I was doing really good in a certain race. But no, all around it had a surprising amount of diversity in it with all the different mini games, and they were all pretty fun. So I would say that also, yeah, for what it is, since I only really have that one problem with it, I think that also will have to go in A tier. I think it belongs there. Of course, I may adjust these as I go, but for now, I think this is pretty fitting. Uncharted: The Lost Legacy. This was the only Uncharted game I hadn't played before these reviews. I grew up playing all the others. I never was that interested in this one. I don't usually get excited about side games. It wasn't because I didn't want to play as a woman. I don't usually get interested in side games no matter what. But this game also surprised me. I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's pretty short. It's a side game, so it only takes about 7-8 hours to complete, really, just to play through the story. But I mean, it really it was an extension of Uncharted 4, so it really didn't bring much new, and it was a lot shorter, of course. But again, because it was a side story, I can't really feel comfortable putting it up with these. I think it'll just have to belong in C tier. It was a good game. It was nothing new, really. I mean, I didn't expect it to be, but okay. So Uncharted 1. I do not like playing this game now. This is the game that I suffered the most going back to get footage for, because it's so dated by now. I just don't enjoy playing this game. It was a good game for its time, but again, like I said with Uncharted 4, the gameplay is just really simple. So going back to Uncharted 1 made it even worse because it's even more simple, and it's a little more clunky because it was the first in the series. And it was also like right when people were starting to make more realistic characters in their games for like the PS3 era. So it looks really aged in that aspect as well. Like the faces don't look good, but of course they were good at the time, so I can't really fault it for that. Story in this one's really simple though. It's all contained on one island, and the environments get a little old after a while. They don't look very diverse like they do in later games. It's definitely the weakest in the series. I don't really see how anybody would think otherwise. Of course, you're allowed to. I don't think anybody really does. I'm gonna go ahead and put that in D tier. I don't think any of these games are gonna be F tier, because these are all at least decent. That's one thing Naughty Dog has always been good at, is consistency. They always make at least decent games. Last of Us Part 2, obviously everyone knows is, because it just came out, is their most divisive game. Sorry. There's some people that just absolutely can't stand it. Some people praise it, say it's the best game ever. It's not either of those. As I said in the review, it's a good game overall. It just had some really weird pacing in the story. I don't like all the directions the story went in. I don't like how it killed off so many characters for no good reason. I don't like how it wasted your time with that section where you go get medicine for Yara just for her to die right after that. But the gameplay is so refined in this game. I think it's way better than the first game's gameplay. It's really fun. The stealth is amazing. I love all the new additions to the weapon and character upgrades. It's just a lot of fun. Playing this game on grounded is also something I would recommend. I feel like it's kind of the way the game was intended to play. It makes it feel more like you're really surviving. You really die like a human would in a couple shots. The story, I don't believe it lives up to the first games, and that's a really important part of this game, unfortunately. So I think that one's gonna have to go in B tier. Like I said though, it's really good. It's really the environments look amazing because Naughty Dog is, they're amazing with their detail. But yeah, I think it belongs in B tier. Now Uncharted 2 is one of the biggest improvements in a sequel I've ever seen. It's still got the simple gameplay, because the whole series does now that I look at it. But the adventure has like such a bigger scope than the first game. You go to all kinds of locations. The environments look a lot better. They're more diverse because of how many locations you go to. The characters are more interesting. I found the dynamics to be better between like the villains. The villain was I didn't say that. The villain was very forgettable in the first game. I couldn't even remember its name. I can hardly ever remember the name of the villain in the first game, but in the second one, the villains are a lot more interesting. They're not like groundbreaking or anything, but they're a lot more interesting to watch. But I just feel like the pacing was perfect. That's really what kind of puts it ahead of 4 for me. Not ahead enough to where I'll put it on S tier. I still don't think any of the Uncharted series belongs in S tier, honestly. Back in the day I would have definitely put it in S tier, but I've just kind of lost a little of my enjoyment of the series over the years. I think it's a really close between 2 and 4 for me, which is my favorite. So I'm just gonna put them next to each other because I couldn't put it below or above it really. I think it's just about even with it for me. Okay, so we got Crash 2 now, which did the same thing for Crash Bandicoot 1 that Uncharted 2 did for the first Uncharted. Crash 2 is a lot better than Crash 1 as far as like the gameplay goes. It's a lot better. It feels a lot better to control. And yeah, it implemented a proper save system, which fixed that problem from the first game. And it's just a lot funner to 100% this game in general, with the way the gems are laid out and everything. It's really fun to 100% this game, to go for all the gems, break all the boxes. Oh, boss fights is something I didn't mention. They're still not. They weren't good in the first game. They're actually mostly pretty bad in the first game, except the final boss. The second game, they improved a little bit, I would say, except for the final boss. The final boss is terrible in this game. It's one of the worst final bosses in any game I've ever played. But besides that, I would say the bosses are a little bit improved, but there's still nothing special, really. Overall, though, this game has some really fun levels, fun and memorable levels. And it did the best job at balancing platforming with vehicles. It only had a couple vehicles you use, and they were only used in like parts of levels. Except for the jetpack had its own levels, but I actually like the jetpack, despite what most people say. If you don't like the jetpack, you're just bad at controlling it, is all I can say. The soundtrack was really memorable, which was something that wasn't really there in the first game, because the first game was just ambience, basically, to make it more atmospheric. I think Crash 2 belongs in A tier. It's a really good game. A lot of people would say it's the best Crash platformer, and I mean, I wouldn't blame them for saying that. So Crash 3 is the most nostalgic I am for a Crash game. I mean, this is the one I grew up playing the most because Crash 1 was too hard for me. Unfortunately, though, it has a lot of vehicles in it. It has way too many. There's more levels that you play in vehicles than you do regular platforming, which is something that I really don't like now. going back. I mean, I'm nostalgic about some of the vehicles, but some of them just control terribly, like the motorcycle, and just the fact that there's too many of them. I mean, you buy a platformer to do platforming. You don't want to be messing with all these kind of vehicles and stuff. And I mean, it adds a little bit of diversity so you don't get bored, but I don't know. I would have preferred to be platforming more often, like in the second game. This game's levels are also the most diverse, though, like their themes, because it's got a time travel theme, so it just allowed for way more options. Since it had way too many vehicles and everything, though, I'll probably also have to do this in A tier. If it had a better balance between the vehicles and platforming, I would personally put this in S tier, because the bosses in this game are way better than the previous two games. They're actually memorable. I remember all of the bosses in this game pretty fondly. And there's cutscenes more often. You interact with the bosses all before you fight them multiple times, and it just makes it builds them up a lot better. It makes you look forward to fighting them more. So yeah, I think A tier is pretty fitting for that game. Now, Uncharted 3 isn't quite as good as Uncharted 2, I would have to say. There's a lot of things it does just as well as Uncharted 2. Like, it has a lot of great set pieces. The combat scenarios are even a little bit better, I would say, than in the last game. The story, though, just never was as interesting to me. It's like really divided into two distinct halves. And the first half I found to be a little slow. I don't know. It's really similar to the second game. They didn't really change anything. They added the ability to throw back grenades, which was helpful, but at the end of the day, it still didn't change much. That's why my review on that game was really short, because I didn't have as much to talk about. It was still a fun game overall. There was a lot of memorable parts about it, but I just don't think it quite lived up to Uncharted 2 and all that game did. So I think that belongs in B tier. Still a good game, just not quite what Uncharted 2 was. Okay, so now all we have is the Jak and Daxter series. Jak 3, I really wanted to love this game. I was really excited to play this one at first. I thought it was going to be my favorite one, because it starts off pretty promising. There's, like, you can see in your menu, there's a lot of things to look forward to. There's light Jak energy. There's, like, the Dark Jak is back from Jak 2. There's all kinds of vehicles, and there's, like, an open world wasteland. It looks really cool. But as you start to play through the game, you kind of realize there's too much going on, because you unlock a new ability, you use it for that mission, and then it kind of just, you never have to use it again. They're really situational. They add just new things for the sake of adding things. They're not very important. And I don't know, the story was pretty disappointing as well. I was interested at first, and I liked the whole twist of, I think Dak, I don't remember his name. It was the wasteland guy that was going to kill you at first. I like the twist of that being Jak's dad and everything. The ending was just really disappointing, especially because it was the end of the trilogy. Even though Jak X did pick up and continue the story, which I was pretty happy about because of the way Jak 3 ended. I didn't like the bosses as much as Jak 2 either. They were just do the exact same thing 3 times type of bosses, and they were okay. But, I mean, yeah, they just weren't great. I'm going to have to put this game in D tier, honestly. I don't like to do that, but I can't say that it's as good as Uncharted: The Lost Legacy. It really belongs around Drake's Fortune, I would have to say. Okay, so Jak 2 was a huge change from the first game. It brought a way darker tone. It had gunplay, which wasn't in the series before, and it had like an open world, which also wasn't there before. I really enjoyed playing Jak 2 for the most part. I like the tonal shift a lot, but I have to say I prefer the collectathon type of game from the first Jak and Daxter. Although I do still enjoy Jak 2's like GTA open world story kind of game. The last third of this game, though, has some of the most annoying missions I've ever played. Like, I was enjoying this game a lot up until that point, but then I remember just every mission in that third act was just making me so angry. I was not having any fun in that point in the game. But I do like the characters a lot, like the villain, Baron Praxis, voiced by Clancy Brown, Mr. Krabs. He was pretty great. And I like the boss fights in this game a lot. The boss fights, I feel like, were the best in the series in this game, because they were all different. He had different phases, and you had to approach them differently each time. It was a lot of fun. The Dark Jak edition was pretty pointless. I mean, you barely got to use that thing. Like, it took way too long to charge up, so I only used that thing a handful of times throughout the game. It's not as bad as Jak 3 that introduces way too many things, but I don't know. It also has some really bad difficulty spikes, which is what this game is known for. Sometimes it'll just get really hard out of nowhere, and I don't know how I would play this game as a kid. Get out of here. And I don't know how I would have played this game as a kid. There was no way I would have been able to finish it. It would have been way too hard. But I do like a lot of things about this game. Personally, I think this game belongs in B tier. I think it's a good amount better than Jak 3. Lost Legacy is the only one I'm not sure about. It might belong in B tier. Because it's not a bad game at all. I'll keep it in C tier because it's a side game. Now, Jak and Daxter Precursor Legacy is my favorite Jak and Daxter game by far. It's one of my favorite Naughty Dog games, period. I can't believe I didn't play this game as a kid because it's so much fun. It's a collectathon platformer, kind of like Spyro, the Dragon, Banjo-Kazooie, that type of stuff. More like Banjo-Kazooie, I would say. But it's so cool because instead of like going to a level select, all of the levels are interconnected into like a giant world. And it just feels so cool because there's no loading screens. The only loading screens are if you fast travel, which you don't have to do. You never really have to do that, except to get to the tutorial island. But besides that, the whole world's interconnected without loading screens. You can walk from one level to the next. It's just really seamless. It's awesome. I've never really seen it done that way in a game like that. It's also just so satisfying to complete this game. Like, I could see myself soon just going back and doing another 100% playthrough, which isn't something I can say about Jak 2 and 3. I didn't even want to 100% those in the first place because it's just such a pain with how hard it is. And I just don't enjoy those games as much. It's a perfect way to follow up Crash Bandicoot, basically. Like, some of these levels, I've heard someone say that its levels are kind of like some Crash Bandicoot levels, like, woven into each other, and I could totally see what they mean by that. Like, some of the levels have, like, certain paths that feel like a Crash Bandicoot level on their own, but they're, like, in the midst of other levels all around them. It's really cool. I'd recommend this game to anyone, and I think it is an S tier, easily. I think it might be Naughty Dog's... I think it's definitely Naughty Dog's best platforming game, for sure. It might be my favorite Naughty Dog game, like, period. It's close between The Last of Us and, you know, CTR and everything, but it's definitely my favorite Naughty Dog platformer. I'll at least say that. So there you have it. That's where I would rank all of the Naughty Dog games. So if you guys disagree, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I hope you guys enjoyed. This really will be the last Naughty Dog content for now. I'm actually about to start playing Dark Souls because I thought, what better way to follow up Bloodborne. But I thought this was a good way to, like, really wrap up this series, and I just thought it'd be fun to do a tier list like this. I've been watching them, and I think they're really fun to watch, so I thought it might be fun to make one. So anyways, if you enjoyed this, I ask that you please leave a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.